Thanks everyone for joining tonight's interactive Q&A or Ask Me Anything session on investment banking. If you want to start dropping any preliminary questions you might have in the chat box, happy to start taking a look through, and then we can dive into the session here. So while everyone's joining the call and starting to populate some Q&A, I'll go ahead in the interest of time and kick things off, introduce myself in the session for today. So my name is Max Meyer. I'm a coach on Leland. I do investment banking, private equity, hedge fund, and MBA recruiting. I went to undergrad at Tulane University and then worked in investment banking, first at Stifel in New York in their TMT M&A team. And then I worked at Goldman Sachs in their TMT investment banking team before moving to private equity at Thomas H. Lee Partners. And then I worked at a crossover fund doing public and private investing, all within software. I have just officially kicked off on Leland as I'm starting my MBA program at Wharton. I've had a number of 5-star reviews, all 5-star reviews. With all the clients I've worked with on Leland, I've had a number of folks signing up for investment banking and private equity recruiting packages, and have had some really good interactions thus far with some folks. Today, I'm here to answer any and all questions that you have about investment banking, including the analyst or even associate roles, day-to-day responsibilities, recruiting prep, networking tips, group placement processes, the dynamics between different banks, including, bulge bracket banks, elite boutique banks, middle market banks, regional banks, anything that you can think of, here to help. I can also answer questions specifically about Goldman, as I get a lot of questions about Goldman typically in my time there. And I'm also happy to talk about what comes after banking, some of the reasons to consider going into investment banking and why it's a lucrative career. Also, I am running a discount just for this group off packages that I offer. So specifically, there's an investment banking recruiting package that I offer. And I've had a number of successful clients that I've worked with use this package with me and land at some pretty great firms that you will probably want to work at here. So we'll go back to the topics. And I think that there's a question in the chat that I'll start things off with. So the first question is, what is the best way to get into investment banking when you don't have a degree in finance and you're not in the banking industry? I would say that I've worked with a lot of people throughout my career that have studied at liberal arts schools. They have engineering backgrounds, and a whole host of other different degrees. Not having a finance degree is not limiting. I think that a lot of banks are used to pulling students from non-finance programs, and they're really looking for people who are intellectual, who are curious, who are hardworking, and have a demonstrated performance of excellence on their resume. So that could be shown through different groups you're involved with on campus, or leadership roles, classroom performance, taking outsized ownership really in a lot of different ways, and being able to communicate why it is you want to work in investment banking and having a firm understanding of what investment banking really is. And so I would not worry necessarily if you don't have a degree in finance, because I would say about half the people I worked with at Goldman and Stifel did not have finance degrees in undergrad. The next question is, what's the best way to get into restructuring and special situations teams? So for those who don't know, a lot of banking is split into coverage versus product groups. Coverage is the different sectors, so tech, healthcare, industrials, etc. And then the product groups are M&A, ECM, debt capital markets, restructuring. So restructuring is basically working with troubled companies or companies who have bad capital structures and helping them shore up their balance sheet through restructuring their debt primarily. These groups are oftentimes the most technical groups on Wall Street and investment banking. They're highly complicated. You're working with lawyers on legal documents. The financial modeling that's associated with some of these roles is more complicated than what you might do in some other groups. And therefore, the best way to really work your way into restructuring is to have a very strong technical and fundamental skill set, and having a firm grasp on financial concepts. Other than that, there's not necessarily too many differences between recruiting for restructuring and maybe an M&A group. But I would say that being really prepared on your technical questions is important. And if that's a concept that you're not, familiar with, or you don't know how to get started, again, happy to chat about that with some folks, how to get ramped up technically. But that's a big thing, regardless of what group you'll go into. The questions can just be a couple layers deeper or more nuanced when it comes to restructuring. The next question is talking about my lateral process and any tips to keep in mind. I really get a lot of questions on this. Folks will get offers to join banks that are maybe less well known to, like I always said, like my grandma didn't know what Stifel was, but she'd heard of Goldman Sachs. And so I think that a lot of folks look to sort of get that brand recognition for a host of reasons. And so lateral recruiting is a big deal. I think that people oftentimes get very hung up on landing at the best name, being at the best bank. And they think that, the first job out of school is their most important job. And I'm here to dispel that. I think that, I'm an example. I have a lot of friends who have done similar things and moved from these middle market banks to the elite boutiques or gold bracket banks. And I think that it's really important to get good deal experience. And so you want to go to a group where you're going to get a lot of deal experience. So when I started at Stifel, I was only doing tech M&A because I know that, in the future, I might want to go into private equity. So I want to get those M&A reps. Got a lot of great deal experience and was able to translate that into a number of offers when I went through lateral recruiting. So I had, headhunters reach out. I had banks reach out, people that I had networked with that I might not have been able to get the job at the time out of undergrad, but eventually was able to, continue those conversations and convert that into lateral offers. And just staying in touch with people in your network, I think will provide very fruitful throughout your career. And it can also lead to, a lot of job offers or at least conversations and interviews. And then it's up to you to be able to communicate those deal reps that I was referencing. What did you do on the deal? How did you take on outsized responsibility? What was challenging about the deal and how did you approach that? What did you think about the deal? And being able to show that you can work on maybe more complex transactions or larger transactions or more experienced management teams, and that you sort of have that presence to be able to do those things. So I think that the lateral process is sometimes ambiguous and it comes to you via, connections that you've developed at some of these banks throughout your networking experience. So that is a good question. So another question is, does coaching also apply for people not in school anymore? And are the chances of lateral recruiting lower due to not being on a normal recruiting cycle or you can't go for internships? So I work with a lot of experienced hires. I work with people that are analysts, associates. Some people are going for VP roles at investment banks. And I think that there are differences between each of these roles. And that's something that I'm more than comfortable covering. I have a lot of connections and friends that are sort of at that associate and VP level now, given that's kind of where I would be if I were in banking. And I don't know that your chances are necessarily lower. It really is predicated on what you're doing now and what kind of experience you're getting. Oftentimes, a popular route is to go to business school and then recruit for investment banking, as they take a lot of their associate classes are coming from MBA programs and doing summer internships through that. There also are ways to work in full time. It's not as easy maybe as going in the front door, but sometimes it's often helpful to go into the side door, the third door, when it comes to trying to secure these roles. And they might need people with, really strong transaction experience. Maybe it's in accounting, where a lot of that skill set is transferable and some of those core competencies relate very well. What is the best way to structure your networking when you're reaching out with interest in a specific group? How would that change if there isn't a role in that group that's currently open that fits your placement? It's a great question. I think that you can oftentimes find on websites or LinkedIn or a couple of different ways, what groups folks are in, and you can reach out to those people individually that you want to target their group. So I knew when I was doing my first investment banking analyst role that I wanted to be in the TMT group, spent a lot of time networking with the people in that group, identifying it, studying the transactions that they did. So a lot of times banks will post their tombstones or their deal experience on their website. They'll have it for different coverage groups. And so you can go in and say, I want to work in tech. Here are the last 5 deals they did on tech. I did research on them, and you can showcase that either before your internship or if you're going full time before a group placement process. So there are a lot of different ways to do that. And if there aren't currently open roles in that group, that doesn't necessarily mean anything. That doesn't mean that you can't, again, work in that side door or take on a role in a year when something opens up. So I would say that, group placement, finding the right coverage or product group is really important. But again, your career is very long and you don't necessarily need to end up in the role that you want to be in 5 years when you're year one. There are multiple ways to get into that group, whether it's going to a different bank, transferring internally in your bank, or coming from an outside hire into investment banking altogether. Someone asked about chances of breaking into IB without the MBA internship there in law school, and there's an M&A. Again, law school really translates well to banking, specifically on the restructuring side, actually. So again, I mentioned it's highly technical, very involved with litigation matters, understanding highly complicated documents. So like that's an instance of someone who would be a good fit for, that restructuring role and they can come at it from that lens. I know some older folks who have their JDs that are now investment banking managing directors. So you don't necessarily need to be in an MBA program. Maybe you spend one of your summers in law school going into banking and then you do that after. And I think that there are, again, some transferable skill sets, but you would need to also be very technically prepared, be good at modeling and things of that nature that you'd have to do on the job. And so it's kind of up to you to develop that in the background. Someone asked about international students in the US and if they'll be able to land a job in investment banking. So I can't comment necessarily on like the whole visa process and banks that sponsor versus don't. But there are plenty of international students that work in investment banking. Oftentimes their stories are very compelling. They have interesting backgrounds. They're very technically sound. There's just a lot of, really sharp international students that do break into banking. So I see no reason why you wouldn't have success if you do all the same things that everyone else is doing, and then just making sure you have an understanding of visa requirements and bank sponsorship and things like that. What else do we have here? An effective way to stay updated and informed on recent deals, websites, newsletters, journals. So the Wall Street Journal is really great. Axios puts out Pro Rata, which is a newsletter that's really good. If you're interested in earlier stage stuff, there's a Fortune puts out Term Sheet. There's another newsletter called Deal Book, which is really popular with investment banking professionals. I think going through different investment banks websites and looking at the deals they're working on is a really great way to sort of stay up to date. It's oftentimes hard, but if you are in undergrad or in an MBA program, your school might have access for you to the Wall Street Journal, which is kind of like the source of truth for people on Wall Street about deals that are going on. So I would encourage you to look into those resources. And if not, it might be worth paying for the student discount. I think Wall Street Journal has one. A lot of these websites do. And if not, it might be worth doing it anyway. It might be a small investment that you can make that, will lead to you having a much better understanding of what's going on when you get into your interviews. So I would highly suggest, subscribing to some of those free newsletters I mentioned, doing the Wall Street Journal. If you can get your hands on Bloomberg somehow, that's also a great resource. So there are a lot of different really good resources out there. And there are podcasts and a number of other things that you can do to sort of keep a pulse on what's going on in the deal market. The next question is opinion on which option is better, lateral to a smaller firm and then to a larger firm, or go back for your master's. I think my general thesis broadly is like you want to be getting the best experience possible early. And so it's not large bank, small bank, middle-sized bank, Houston, New York. Like it doesn't really, there's no sort of blanket statement that applies to these things. I think it's really about getting the best deal rep. So even if you're going to a smaller bank, you're working in a secondary city, you might be doing really great deals and getting to take on a lot of outsized responsibility at the analyst level that'll fully prepare you to be solid no matter where you go, whether it's to, another investment bank you might be interested in, or you want to go to private equity, or you want to go work at a company in an operations role. That's one of the appealing things about investment banking is that, you have so much optionality with your career coming out of these analyst programs. And so I don't know that there's a better or worse option. If you're already in banking, you probably don't need to go back and get your master's. The MBA is really an opportunity for people who are not in banking preschool to do that internship while they're in MBA program and then land that full-time associate offer thereafter. Any groups that have better exit ops? Exit ops, for those who are not aware, is like what people say when they talk about the opportunities you can have after investment banking. So oftentimes people go into private equity roles or venture capital roles or growth equity roles, which, by the way, I'm hosting another Ask Me Anything directly after this session on private equity. So if you're interested in learning more about that, we can talk about that in the next session. Please feel free to join. But in terms of best exit opportunities, I think it really is dependent on what you're interested in. Are you interested in working with earlier stage companies? Are you interested in working with later stage companies? Do you want to be more hands-on with the companies, hands-off? Do you want to do public markets investing? Do you want to go work at a company in the corporate finance arm? There are a number of different options. And so I don't know that one group's better than the other. For me, I knew I really liked tech. I interned at a tech company when I was in college. I really liked software. I wanted to go work in software. And so I positioned myself in each of my roles to spend as much time as possible understanding software businesses, understanding tech. And I think that's what led to my career progression, was being able to point to my interest in tech, my understanding of the industry. And it's not because I worked at Goldman maybe that I got the next job, but I think it's just having that really good deal experience. So again, this gets back to, it's not always about the brand name bank. That doesn't mean everything, and being in the best group. Like some people will say, oh, TMT is the best group in Goldman, but it's not the best group in Goldman if you want to go work in industrials private equity. So it really is just dependent on your sort of career thoughts. The next question is about chances of getting a summer associate program post MBA this December coming from wealth management and credit background. The MBA program is really a great way to, if you're more experienced, to go into school, take the break, and go into very structured investment banking recruiting and have those associate roles possible and available to you. And so I think that if you're in any MBA program, any solid MBA program, there will be a lot of investment banks that need folks. And again, it doesn't matter which bank you're at to start, because your career is very long. And a lot of people coming out of the MBA programs doing banking will be career bankers. And so your career really becomes quite long, and people hop around banks a lot. So just because you start at one place doesn't mean you won't end up somewhere else. Someone asked another question about restructuring and special sits. Aside from the technical aspects, how would you approach networking with the Goldman Sachs special sits team from undergrad? So if you want to work in one of the, so this is kind of separate from banking, because Goldman has, and I think this is what the question's about, also a merchant bank, which does a number of different investing strategies. These groups oftentimes will pull directly from the Goldman analyst banking program, but there are people who come in from undergrad. Typically, this is, a lot of people in these groups are highly technical. They go to undergrad schools that place very well into the merchant bank at Goldman. And so I'm not going to spend too much time on that. But I think the best thing to do with just more broadly for the group is, if you want to go into a specific group, spend time finding people there, find creative ways to get in touch with them, and try and get on their radar and have a conversation with them. The next question is, what's the best way to turn initial networking calls into interviews? And what's the best way to stand out enough to get those calls and first responses you need to speak with? I think this is such a great question. So thank you, Jacob, for this. This is really, I think, where the value of coaching comes into play most. You can spend time on your own studying technical questions and understanding those concepts. But when it comes to your unique situation and trying to figure out how to make yourself stand out, or how to convert those networking calls into interviews and the interviews into offers, that's where it comes down to story development, nailing down questions about why you want to go into banking that are beyond the surface level answers that, the tens of thousands of other people competing for that one spot are giving. These roles are so competitive, and you really have to stand out. And I think it's about how you shape your experience that you've had before, and making sure that the interviewer fully understands why you're the best person suited to be their analyst, or associate, or whatever your role you're going for is, because it's so competitive. And I think, again, this is really where the value of coaching comes in, to understand your story, to help you develop it, and help you sort of tie in how you, from when you were born to when you want to work at insert investment bank analyst role, like how to tie together that narrative in a cohesive way. So another question's about non-target schools and how hard it is to break into banking. Non-target schools are, look, there's a handful of schools within each bank that they recruit at. every bank has different target schools. So that's kind of like one other thing is people say, oh, well, this school's not a target school, but it might be for, X bank. But some folks are in non-target schools. I went to a non-target school and I understand what that process looks like. It's really on you to take the initiative to show that you want to be in that seat. So when I was in college, I would fly up to New York and run around the city in a suit and tie and meet with anyone that would meet me to try and get banking jobs. I wanted to show them that I had the grit and the tenacity needed in an analyst, and I was willing to forego my spring break with all my friends to be up in New York and be sitting in an office on Park Avenue, basically begging to get a networking call, begging to get interviews, showing that I was really passionate about it. And so there are other ways that you can structure your recruiting, and I have different tips on that, but that is the question there. Someone asked about the size of the groups at Goldman. Really depends on, group product coverage, financing versus classic, what analyst role you're talking about, associate, VP, et cetera. So it just really depends. But analyst class can be anywhere from 3 people at a boutique to 30 people in a group at a bulge bracket bank or a generalist program at an elite boutique. Have you seen FIG bankers move into healthcare PE, or do they usually come from healthcare IB? I actually think that your group does matter, but at the end of the day, people just want to hire smart folks on the private equity side of things. And so I can come back to this a little bit more in the private equity, ask me anything in a few minutes, but I don't think that your group necessarily dictates where you go if you leave banking. Someone asked for 10 target schools for investment banking. Again, this is really going to depend on the bank and where you are. So like banks in Houston recruit more from the Texas schools, like Texas A&M and Rice in Texas, and that's the oil and gas group, target schools. But Goldman TMT in New York wants the kids from Wharton and Duke and Princeton and some of these types of schools. And if you're wanting to do tech banking in San Francisco, then it's Berkeley, UCLA, USC, Stanford, schools like that. So it really is going to depend on geography, group, what bank you're talking about, et cetera. So hopefully that's like a helpful list, but again, it is really dependent. Someone's asking about incoming freshmen. Kudos to you for being on the call, Isaac. It's very impressive that you're on this call here as an incoming freshman. I think the biggest things in general, just for folks, is try to get banking or tangential experience before you have to go into that competitive junior summer recruiting. So even if it's interning at an investment bank in a random city in Middle America that only does small deals in that area, like that shows that you're interested in banking. So that is one of many things, and I'm happy to talk with you or anyone about any of their individual situations again during a coaching session, spend an hour with you going through some of these questions and how to best position your story. Someone asked how hands-on the coaching program is. So just so you know, my philosophy is, I can structure a program from scratch for someone if they don't know where to go. And if someone wants to come with me with very specific questions, I also can, go with you and very in depth on things. So I had someone reach out to me about hedge fund recruiting today, and we went through a detailed plan with specific questions that he had about the different stock pitches he wanted to do and the different things he wanted to do for recruiting there. And then I have some people come to me that are a little lost. They don't know where to start, where to begin. They feel a little overwhelmed, and I can structure a process with them about how to get ready from, networking and how to start approaching that, to positioning your story, to getting those intro calls down, converting that into interviews, what things to focus on in the interview, how to make yourself stand out, and then sort of convert those into offers. I'm happy to get as hands-on as people want or as hands-off. It really is dependent on each client, and I don't take a templated approach. I take a very personalized approach with all my clients because that's where I see the best success. If I try to template something for a client who wants to get hands-on and wants to ask about specific things, it's not going to work for them. And I'm very outcome-based. So if you look at my Leland profile, you'll see all the firms that I've helped people place at. I think it's a pretty good list. And I think that's part of my secret sauce as a coach, is being able to get really personalized with you, roll up my sleeves, and get in the trenches with you. Someone asked about Chicago. Chicago is, there's a couple of other schools that are obviously in the Midwest that are great. Indiana Kelley has a great banking program. Northwestern places a lot of kids in there. Notre Dame's another school that I've seen with a lot of success. So there's like a lot of Midwest schools that feed into Chicago, and Chicago has a lot of industrials programs. But again, happy to come into into more detail on that in coaching sessions. Got about 4 minutes left, so I'm going to try and tick through these next two pretty quickly. And if there are more, then we'll see, or I might have to save the rest for coaching. So if you come across anyone who managed to pivot into investment banking and private equity without going through the formal summer internship, thinking about Columbia MBA J-term students, fantastic question. And again, one of these unique situations, but yes, like these things are possible. I know people who have gone to CVS and placed at great banks. I'm sure there are people in J-term. I could ask my friends at CVS about some folks to connect you with if we go through the coaching and all that as well. But you don't need the summer formal internship. I didn't do a formal summer internship, and I landed a full-time analyst role coming out of a non-related program. So yes, this is possible, and I have a lot of experience there, so I'm happy to just talk about that. AI effect on banking. I think that AI will actually make analyst life easier, but I think it's going to take a long time. Banking's pretty old school, and I don't think that VPs are going to want to have their analysts plugging every sim into ChatGPT and just spitting things out. So that's that. And I'm going to take one more question here from Pablo, and then we're going to wrap things up so we can move on to the private equity Ask Me Anything, and I'll wrap up the slides here. But breaking down technical prep and the most important things to know before walking into an interview, any resources you recommend in order to prepare besides coaching. There are a lot of good guides out there on different websites that you might know, like Wall Street Oasis or Street of Walls or things of that nature. And there's some guides that float around. I have access to a lot of those guides from my time in banking. I kind of know what's good and what's bad for different sorts of things. I think as a general tip to get started is to start digging through some of that. And if you want to do it without the coaching, you're going to have to kind of figure out what questions you might think are important. Or if we work together, I can work with you on narrowing your focus on, hey, the Wall Street Oasis prep's really good for the accounting, but when it comes to LBOs, you want to use Street of Walls. So there's just nuances like that kind of save you time, but there are publicly available resources, so you don't have to do coaching to get technically prepped. So with that, again, I'm doing one-on-one coaching. I've got some packages specifically for banking if you're interested in signing up, or I also do hourly coaching. So please feel free to take a look at my Leland profile. I am starting my MBA program this week. So there's a number of scheduling things. So just message me if you have any issues with my calendar. But other than that, I just want to say thank you to everyone for joining and for all the great questions. It was really great to kind of rapid fire go through all those. And I know we have a lot more to cover. And so I hope to see some of you in some coaching sessions and get a chance to work together and hopefully help you land some really great roles like some of my past clients. So thanks for joining. Please feel free to join the private equity Ask Me Anything starting in a minute. And I look forward to talking to some of you guys then.